And so the first thing that I want to do is, actually I want to look at the workspace and how that's set up. And we'll also do a quick file setup and how things are organized. That's where our conversation is going to begin. And our software that we're focusing on in the class is Adobe Illustrator. It's this little icon right here, this AI icon. If you click on, that's going to launch your software for you. How many of you are familiar with Illustrator? How many of you have used it? How many of you would say, I'm pretty good with Illustrator? If I asked you what a clipping mask is, would you know what it is within Illustrator? I'm sorry if this is going to be really rudimentary for a few of you at the beginning, but I promise you that as the quarter progresses, we will cover some things that I think will make you a more polished illustrator. And for those of you who have never used Illustrator, I think this is a perfect class because we're going to learn how to use this really effectively. As you can see here, when we launch the UI, we're looking at some possibilities for what we want to create or work with within our software. You'll notice that there is a button to create a new file, and normally that's where we would go to. You'll also notice that there is a list of recent files that have been opened or evaluated. You can see some student projects that were opened in here. And then there are templates as well. We're going to ignore any existing files. We're going to go straight to making a new file. I'm going to go ahead and hit new. And we get this pop-up window. And in the pop-up window, you'll notice that in the top bar, you have different mediums that you can work with, or media type. With that being said, we can investigate what some of these formats will give us. You'll notice that if I click on mobile, I get file formats that pertain to a particular device. You'll notice that there is an additional option that shows view more presets. And then below it, you can see some of the templates that might be accessible for you. I'm going to go ahead and select view all options. And you'll notice that we have a long list of different devices that you could potentially design to. And as you click on these different devices, the pixel aspect ratio changes. It's very specific. This list is constantly updated. If you were working in a UI UX environment and they were really concerned about accessibility, you might be actually researching or designing to more devices than what you see here. Or you would be dealing with different pixel aspect ratios that might be older or legacy devices. You might have a consideration with that. While this gives you a potential list to work with that's current, in a production environment, you might be looking at other devices that are not listed on here. You'd have to research that on your own. If you go to web, you'll notice we have the same format. And you'll notice that the very first one in the upper left says common, and then you have different pixel dimensions as well. Some that are specific to a full screen on a device. And then you'll notice that in the bottom right corner, there is a format that says 640 by 480. This is a really special format. This is the initial web dimension, 640 by 480, which is based on the old cathode ray tube monitors that were the old cathode ray tube televisions. The pixel aspect ratio for that is 640 by 480 in the US. And there's an actual term for it. It's called NTS. That's what this dimension is based off of. Those old, big, chunky looking televisions. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? You don't know. You guys are too young. And what's interesting about those televisions was that whether it was this big, a little TV, or whether it was gigantic, they were all 640 by 480. On the larger televisions, what you were seeing was a larger pixel. The square that made up the image was bigger than the squares that made up the image on a smaller TV. So the integrity of the image actually got lost the bigger the TV became. That's kind of interesting, right? That's the dimension it was based off of. And it's here for the same reason that I mentioned you might want to research other dimensions. If you are concerned about accessibility and you think somebody might be using an old monitor, you would want to test or see what your content would look like. Not only on a common or a current dimension format, you would want to test it in an NTSC format device as well. Anyway, those are the dimensions for web. These are the dimensions for print. We have some for film and video. And they don't have NTSC on here, do they? There it is, NTSC. Oh, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. 640 by 480 was the formal standard NTSC. This is NTSC DV. Art and illustration, and a bunch of other templates. I design, or I teach the class to print dimensions. Most of my conversations, unless it's a UI UX exercise where we're designing for an app or a website, which is not in this class, in some classes we do, most of the conversations revolve around print dimensions. And so you'll notice that our first document size is letter, and then they're not showing as much as they used to, but there's letter right there. And then there's a dimension called tabloid, which is 11 by 17, 11 by 17. Now there is also legal. Legal is, change the dimensions here. I don't like looking at this in point. Let's go to inches. Legal is 8.5 by 14. It's approximately this. It's taller, right? It's called legal. Why do you think they have this dimension? What do you think the excess space is used for? Signature, possibly a receipt, tear it away. But yes, you have the written document and then you have the legal signature portion. That's why it's taller. Well, these are the three most common dimensions for US communication in print format. Now, you'll notice that we have some dimensions, A4, A3, B4, 5. Those are the European standards. They're the equivalents of what I'm speaking of right now. Now, what's interesting about the European system is that it is based on the Fibonacci sequence. It's actually following logical system-based units of measurement. If you don't know what the Fibonacci sequence is, you might want to look it up. It's the golden ratio, the golden rectangle, or the Fibonacci. They're all really one and the same. So they all sort of scaffold in with one another beautifully, mathematically. Ours don't. But that's what we work with, and that's what we're going to design to in our class. I've been in the design world for, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, a really long time. I think my first internship was in 1997. That will kind of give you an idea of how long I've been in this. And a lot of the work, especially the last few years, I was consulting. I've been in consulting since 2015 with an arm of the city of Palo Alto. However, I'm no longer consulting with them because they no longer need print services. And that's what I was doing, print services for them. And what I want to mention is that as a designer working in agencies and as a consultant, doing a bunch of freelance work, I've done a lot of print work. I would probably say that's like my specialty. How many times have I worked in A4, A3, B4, the European standard? Never. It's never happened. I've always worked in the US numeric system, and the majority of our documents that I've constructed have fall in these three document types. That's why I'm teaching it in this realm, because it's what we do. Now, I don't like to speak in absolutes. I'm sure some of you might encounter some of these other dimensions at some point in your career. That's fair. It just hasn't happened in mine. The other thing that I want to mention is that when we look at these documents, you'll notice that it's given you a point size. A point size could also be swapped with a pixel dimension. They're really one and the same for all intents and purposes. But you can change your unit of measurement right here. I'm selecting letter, and I'm going to scrub to where it shows my units of measurement. Pixels, points, you'll see the pixels and points didn't change. Picas, which is a newsprint unit of measurement, where it divides an inch into 6/6. So it's a different way of measuring the space. I've worked on one document in 20-something years in Picas, one. It was for the Wall Street Journal. It was a tiny little ad like this big. I don't teach to Picas, but if you want to research it, you can. And inches, this is what I teach to, because most of my documents, 99.9% of them, fall in that category. And then other units of measurements. I'm sure if I was working in a country outside of the US, it would probably be metric, but we're not. I'm going to teach to inches. Now, this gives me my document size, 8.5 by 11. You'll notice that there is an option for the orientation. We can refer to these orientations in one of two ways. You either refer to it in terms of an artistic phrase. Some people refer to it, what does this look like? A portrait. Portrait. We'll call it portrait, or they will call it landscape. Some people will call it vertical or horizontal. I will use them interchangeably. But portrait, horizontal, vertical, landscape.